Hi all of you awesome scuba divers out there, welcome to the Scuba Diving Magazine channel and welcome to Ask Mark, our scuba diving Q&A, where I, Mark, former dive instructor, do my best to answer your scuba diving questions. So if you have any scuba diving questions, pop it down in the comment section underneath this video and use this Ask Mark hashtag in your comments to get it featured in an up and coming video. I do my best to type out an answer and the community does an awesome job of answering questions as well, so well done everyone for doing that. So yeah, if you've got any questions, pop it down in the comment section. If you're unsure about anything to do with scuba diving, yeah, we're here to help you out. Today we're here to help Emily about surface marker buoys. So Emily says, hi, I was hoping you can help me understand the interchangeability of a dSMB and a simple SMB if I only plan to use it when I deploy it during my safety stop at 5 meters. I used the simple version for this purpose during my last liveaboard, and despite occasionally having to reinflate at the surface due to some air escaping whilst being deployed underwater, it didn't seem to be too problematic, and so I was wondering if it's necessary to have a dSMB for this purpose. The issue for me is that somehow I tend to end up misplacing my SMB quite often, and so the price difference between the two makes it a more acceptable loss when it's replacing the SMB regularly rather than the dSMB at double the cost. So the first thing for me is the terminology that I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to, because an SMB is quite different to a dSMB. So an SMB is a surface marker buoy, and when we use it in scuba diving, it's quite a broad term, but strictly it means one of these. So this is a surface marker buoy, and it's what I call a permanent surface marker buoy, because you inflate it at the beginning of the dive, and that is always on the surface. You still attach it to a reel, but you basically hold it like a balloon throughout the entire dive and you tow it behind you. Some areas require one at all times. A lot of free divers and spearfishers will use a slightly different version of a dSMB, more like this, because it's a handy like storage place. They can attach like various tools and things because they spend a lot of time in the water, and they're relatively small in the water, so they want this like permanent presence on the surface so that, yeah, nearby boats know that they're there. So that's a SMB. A dSMB is a delayed surface marker buoy, more like this. This is about as small as they get, and it comes down with you on the dive, deflated, and then when you want to surface, yeah, you open it up, you unravel it, you inflate it, and that shoots up to the surface. You're hopefully holding onto the reel or the spool at the other end, and you just hold on to that for your 3-minute safety stop, and then you wind it back in, and it just helps boats know that, yeah, there's a diver right here and they're going to surface soon. Don't run them over. So that's the first thing. I think what you're talking about is a more basic dSMB compared to a more fancy dSMB. So a more basic one is literally just like a sock. It's still exactly the same, but down at the bottom is just open-ended. We call it an open-ended dSMB, and you inflate it usually orally by you can do it a few ways. You can either use the exhaust from your primary to like blow it up like a loose balloon, as it were, catching the bubbles coming out of your exhaust, or you can use your primary, turn it upside down and purge, or you can use your alternate, or whatever it is, you can inflate it from underneath and it inflates. And the main problem with that, as you've discovered, is that when they're on the surface, if they flop over, all the gas just comes out of the bottom. Which just means you reel it in and it comes back down to meet you, and then you inflate it. So the main way to combat that is to always hold a bit of tension in the line so that the SMB is upright. It doesn't have to be at full height in the water, but if you're pulling it down a little bit, it means that it's always going to be upright and the bottom section is always going to be under the water, so it's not going to flop over and just vent any gas. The alternative is, as you now know, a more fancy dSMB, something like this that I call a closed cell dSMB, but not even that. You can get like hybrids that are often called like fluted. I used to call them fluted when I was working at Simply, and they'd have an open end at the bottom and then basically a funnel so that any gas that comes in would go into the main body, but as it filled up, and of course as it's ascending, the gas is expanding, that would then close that opening at the bottom so that you get the best of both worlds. It's not perfect, but you can still inflate it normally, as opposed to a closed cell dSMB like this one, which is heat welded all the way around it so that any gas that you put into it stays in. These are my personal favorites, just because there's very little room for failure. Even if you don't get a full amount of gas into it, whatever gas that you put into it is going to stay into it. You can also use it as a bit of a personal flotation device. Legally, it's not a personal flotation device, but it is a bag of air. It's going to be buoyant. So I do prefer it. It's better if you can not lose your dive equipment. But it's the old adage of just kind of like because they're like fancy BCDs and there are cheap BCDs. There are fancy dSMBs and there are cheap dSMBs. Which one you go for is personal. It's up to you. Would I be happy diving with a really cheap, really basic dSMB? Sure, it gets the job done. However, I prefer using slightly fancier ones. It's a bit like a car. Sure, a cheap old banger will kind of get you where you need to go, but a nice car is just that little bit nicer. It's just that kind of thing, really. It's a personal choice. Some people don't see value in like really fancy, expensive cars. They find something in the middle. That might be something worth considering, especially if you keep losing your car. So yeah, it's personal preference, really. Personally, because I dive fairly frequently, yeah, I do prefer a slightly more fancy dSMB because I just find it easier to just use it, basically, as opposed to a more basic dSMB, which I'd use in a pinch if that's all I had. But if I had the choice, I'd go down the fancier route. Just, yeah, put your name on it, keep track of it, use a bolt snap to clip it onto something, and just try not to lose it. Yeah, you can say about anything, really. Regulators, dive torches. There's plenty of like fancy equipment out there which does basically the same job as the cheaper equipment, but just slightly better. It has slightly nicer features to it, a slightly better breathe and whatnot. When it comes to dSMBs, you're really getting the different inflation valves, and maybe different like attachment points. Some go like a bit too sublime to the extreme. I've seen some that have, like this one for example, has this like bungee loop to wrap it up when you're not using it. That's handy. I've seen some that have a bungee loop and some Velcro that wraps around it. That's a touch excessive. Some with huge like strops, which is just a bit of a pain attaching onto it, whereas a little D-ring does exactly what I need it to. Others that have all these kind of fancy bells and whistles where actually you don't need that many sort of things. Like you get some with message windows on the side, this little like clear pouch which you're supposed to, if you need something, you rip a page out of your wet notes, you write down a note to the surface to send it up to the surface. I've never used that. Some people might. Some people also put glow sticks in that for night diving. If you need that kind of feature, then yeah, by all means get that dSMB, but it's not like essential. As long as it's bright orange and it gets you seen, that's all you really need in a dSMB. It is just, yeah, is it worth that extra cost of just like, oh, it's deflated again, let me just re-inflate it. Whereas if it's like a closed cell, you don't have to worry about it. That, in my mind, is definitely worth it. It just makes my life a lot more like carefree. I can just put some gas into it, shoot it up, and I know it's going to be there on the surface. Yeah, the same with like reels and spools. You get the cheap plastic spools, but then you can get the really fancy aluminium ones for, I think they're like 70 quid. You're like, well, yeah, if they do the exact same thing, one's just slightly fancier, one's just a little bit nicer, why would you go for that one? Because it's slightly nicer. Personal preference. It's not really up to me to say that, yeah, you have to go down this route. It's whatever works for you. Any other questions? By all means, pop it down in the comment section underneath this video. Use this rsmart hashtag to get it featured in an up and coming video. Otherwise, remember to check out our website, scubadivingmag.com, and also check out Diving into the Darkness. It's a cave diving documentary all about Jill Heinarth. We're having a special online premiere that you can sign up for. It's going to be from the 9th to the 15th of June this year, 2024. So if you're interested, sign up at this website. Otherwise, like, share, subscribe, do all that good social media stuff. Thank you for watching, everybody, and of course, safe diving.
This is not some Boy Scout badge. You go in there and there is a chance that you are going to die.
Not for me, personally. I've been in like overhead environments and things, but not really anymore, especially now that I have a family. It's just, you really do have to have that kind of mindset to, yeah, I really want